Good day to all of you joining us from all around the country. Welcome to Excelsior Classes. I wonder if any of you have come here tonight with questions. There are so many questions rolling around in our minds as we prep our students to possibly attend college. Perhaps the most important one. Well, we are so glad that you are here with us tonight to watch our webinar and participate in Homeschool to Higher Ed, the myth, the truth, and the middle ground. You're here at Excelsior Classes. We are NCAA approved and ASC approved. Those are both accrediting organizations that have looked at our curriculum and say, yes, you are what we're looking for. Excelsior Classes offers live online courses for 5th through 12th graders, and it's accredited and approved, so students can choose from a variety of subjects that are taught by Christian educators, and it is the perfect college prep setting for them. My name is Julie Rohr, and I'll be your host this evening. Let me introduce you a little bit to Whitney. Whitney, actually, she sent me her bio and it made me laugh. She said she knew she had reached peak homeschooling when she bought a custom 9-foot by 6-foot bookcase with matching ladder. I'm very jealous, and still didn't have room for all the books. I don't know if all of you can relate to that. Maybe not the ladder, but definitely the books. But I can. She lives in her childhood home in North Carolina. She's been married to her husband for 24 years, and they have 2 children. Right now, she has a 14-year-old son who would probably rather be on the golf course than doing his schoolwork, but he is still plugging along. And then they have a daughter, and that was their first homeschool graduate. Their daughter was a National Merit Scholar, and she's at the University of Alabama. So Whitney is the founder of Launchpad Consulting, a company that is a private guidance counselor company, I would call it. And for us in the homeschool community, we don't usually have the luxury of having a traditional guidance counselor like those students who attend a brick and mortar school. So it's so nice to be able to find folks like Whitney who have a sense of what needs to happen at this point in each student's journey. So we are excited to see what she has to share with us. Her presentation will be about 40 minutes long, and at that point we'll stop and you can ask any questions that you would like. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Whitney, and I thank you very much for being here. It's all yours, Whitney.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for having me here. I am so excited. Really an honor to get to speak to all of you. I'm going to go ahead and pop my slides up so everybody can hopefully see what I'm talking about here. Hopefully that's all working like it should be. Okay, so again, thank you. Thank you for having me. It really is an honor to be here tonight, be asked to share with you all, and hopefully encourage you. As Julie said, my name is Whitney Crowell, and I am an independent educational consultant. So I specialize in helping homeschool families and other families as well sort of navigate that high school to college journey. I'm also a homeschooling mom of over 12 years, so I've been where many of you are probably right now, kind of staring down the pike, to launching your kids into adulthood. I'm there again right now with my son who's 14. So I've kind of seen the journey from both sides, and maybe that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective that's hopefully helpful in some capacity for others. So when I started talking to the folks over at Excelsior about maybe presenting on a topic like this, we were all really excited to take on some of those common myths that are out there about homeschoolers and about college. And there really is a lot out there. So if you have never been down this road before, it can just be overwhelming. And as I started thinking about which topics I specifically wanted to address, I started to realize that homeschoolers are kind of like Newton's third law, right? There's for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. For every person who says, "Hey, you should do this," somebody else pops up and says, "No, no, no, you should do that." So I decided that it might be kind of fun to frame tonight in terms of these competing myths, right? Because this probably won't surprise you, but the best course of action in my experience is usually kind of somewhere in the middle. So we are going to try to kind of sail between Scylla and Charybdis there, if you remember your Odyssey. My goal tonight is just to try to cut through those extremes and sort of play them off of each other, so that we can find that middle ground where we can make reasonable and informed decisions in order to help prepare our kids for college and even beyond. So I hope this is going to bring you some encouragement, some peace of mind, and you can leave here this evening feeling like you're better prepared to navigate this journey with your child with confidence and with clarity. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and we'll jump right in with our very first myth matchup. All right. So in this corner, we have homeschoolers can't get into college. Have you heard that one? If you homeschool, your kid will never go to college, right? But in the other corner, we have college's big puffy heart love homeschoolers, right? So let's talk about how those two opposing views fit together or whether or not they do. The first one I often hear from new homeschoolers, right? Who tend to hear it from people who don't really know a whole lot about homeschooling. The second one tends to come more from homeschool veterans, right? Who have maybe had a really good experience getting their kids into college. So they might be well-meaning, but sometimes it can be a little bit misleading. And obviously, both of these things can't be true at once. So which is it? How do colleges feel about homeschoolers? Well, some colleges really do recruit homeschoolers. Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee is a good example of a college that has a really super robust homeschool admissions effort. On the other hand, some colleges seem like they're trying to make it a little extra harder for homeschoolers and maybe even discourage homeschoolers from applying. So there are a handful of colleges, particularly public colleges, who are kind of notorious for making homeschoolers jump through extra hoops. I'm not saying they actually intend to exclude homeschoolers, but sometimes homeschoolers can get that impression, especially if those are the only kinds of colleges that they interact with. So there definitely are extremes, but those are the exception, really, not the rule. The truth, like we said, is usually kind of somewhere in the middle. So, what is that middle ground? Well, do homeschoolers go to college? Yes, they do. Homeschoolers get into college. They get in every year. They get in much the same way and really at much the same rate as traditionally schooled students. Most colleges are neutral when it comes to homeschooling. So they see homeschooled applicants the same way they see really all of their other applicants. So that's good news and bad news, right? Homeschooling is not going to actively work against your student in most cases, but it's not going to make them stand out either in and of itself. It's really all about what you've done with your educational experience over those 4 years of high school, whether you're a homeschooler or a public schooler or a private schooler. So I'm going to let you in on a little secret. This is the best thing I have to say all night. So if you don't get anything else, get this one. Getting into college is easy. Okay. Now, getting into a particular college, a specific college can be really, really tough. But getting in overall is really not that difficult if you apply strategically and apply well. There are something like 3,000 colleges in the United States. So I promise you that one of them, and probably more than one of them, is going to be a good fit for your unique student. So that's really the name of the game. You want to find schools that are a good fit for the student that you have instead of trying to groom the student for a particular school. Okay, I tell my students this all the time. Colleges aren't soulmates, right? You're getting a degree, you're not getting married. So students can and do find happiness, they find success at all kinds of schools. It's really easy for students and parents to get hung up on that handful of schools that are household names. But you really don't have to attend one of those bottleneck schools where everybody and their brother is applying every year in order to make a successful life. So my number one piece of advice is don't fall in love. Don't let your teenager fall in love either. Instead, what you want to do is build a balanced college list that includes a range of schools that would all potentially be a good fit for your student. So how do we do that? How do we build a balanced list and then make sure we're applying strategically? It's going to take some research for you and for your student. Um, but you're going to look at two basic questions. The first question is the school a good fit for this student? So that encompasses a lot of factors. Obviously, you want to look at the programs and the majors that the school offers. Does it match with what your student wants to study? That's a given, right? You want to look at things like academic support. Does this school fit with the way your student learns? As homeschoolers, we have a real advantage there, right? Because we know how our kids learn. That can look like a lot of things. You can look at class size. It can look at availability of tutoring, access to faculty members, accommodations for learning differences, if that's something that affects your student. But basically, is my student going to learn well here? You also want to look at the social environment and the campus culture. Is your student going to feel at home at the school? So again, lots of factors there depending on your needs. The size of the student body, the geographic location, is it too far? Is it too close to home, right? Is there Greek life? Is there religious life? If either of those things is important to your family or your student. What's the political activity on campus like? And is that going to be comfortable or uncomfortable for your student? What's the culture like? Is it collaborative? Is it super competitive? How does that fit with your student's personality? And then lastly, the one we parents all know about are the financial factors, the affordability of the school, but also the likelihood of your student receiving aid at this particular school, because there really is a lot of variation in what's offered from college to college in merit aid and in need-based aid. Okay, so that's the first question. Is the school a good fit for the student? Secondly, is the student a good fit at the school? In other words, is the student going to be competitive for admission at this school? That's going to take into account things like your student's academic profile, GPA, test scores, extracurriculars, all of that in relationship to the average student who is admitted at that particular school. How your student stacks up against the rest of the applicant pool is going to give you some idea of how likely he or she is to be admitted and to be competitive for things like scholarships. So if, for example, a student who is in, say, the upper 25th percentile of a college's average GPA and test score range, that student is more likely to be competitive than a student who's in the middle 50th percentile, right? That doesn't mean you don't apply if you're in that middle 50th percent. It just gives you an idea of where you are relative to the rest of the likely applicant pool and what kind of offer you're likely to receive if you're likely to receive one at all. So where do you find that kind of information? Well, the obvious place to start is with the college itself, right? Their website, their social media, lots of good information there. Just remember, it is a marketing pitch. The Common Data Set is an underused resource, in my opinion. That's a survey that colleges fill out every year for the government, and most of them are available online if you just do a search. They're going to give you, the Common Data Set's going to give you some idea of like the academic profile of an average student, cost of attendance, availability of financial aid, things like that. So it's always a good thing to take a peek at. Campus visits, I do encourage when they're possible. Sometimes they're more difficult than others, depending on where your student is looking to go and the travel involved and all of that. But campus visits can give you, first of all, a good sense of what kind of student the college is typically looking for. It can also help your student determine if the environment feels like a place where they would be at home. Does it feel homey? Does it feel inviting? Do I feel like I belong here? The best way to get that sense is with a campus visit, if at all possible. And one last one that tends to get left off the list, but is one of my favorites, are parent groups. Especially for the schools that are at the top of your students' list. I highly recommend looking for parent groups on something like Facebook. Most colleges will have an official group that parents can join. Parents can ask questions there. You could ask questions there, but you can also just sort of sit back and listen, and lurk a little bit, and you get a really good feel for what other parents are talking about. This will tell you a lot about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the day-to-day experience at that college. What are parents raving about? What are they angry about? What are they complaining about? What is the student experience really like, when you actually get down to living at this place? So that's sort of a place that not very many people know to go, but that's one I highly recommend. So the long and short of it is, while you can definitely target schools that actively recruit homeschoolers, you don't have to. It's really all about finding that right match between your student and the colleges on their list, and then making from there informed and conscientious decisions. Okay? So let's move on to our second myth of the evening. On this side, we have you have to follow the public schools curriculum so you don't miss anything, right? And on the other side, well, why would we teach something that my kids would never use? Sometimes I hear, oh, I don't use algebra in my daily life. I never use Shakespeare in my daily life, so I'm not going to bother with that, right? Um, or sometimes like we're focusing on what matters in real life. So again, we have this split. For some people, it's just an assumption that public schools must know what it takes to get kids into college because public school kids go to college, right? So we need to do what they're doing. On the other hand, well, let's say this first. Your transcript does not have to mimic the public schools. It doesn't even have to come from an accredited program in order to be acceptable to colleges. So you don't have to change your educational philosophies just because your child has entered the ninth grade. If what you're doing is working, you can keep doing it. That's okay. That doesn't mean, though, that your homeschool transcript, which at the end of the day is just a record of your homeschool's curriculum, it can't just be anything you feel like making it either. You can't just decide to skip classes that you think are irrelevant or maybe that your student doesn't like to do. Colleges do have admissions requirements, and the most important factor in an admissions decision is going to be the student's academic record. So if their transcript doesn't demonstrate that the student has successfully completed the minimum requirements, the chances of him or her getting into that school is rapidly approaching zero. So if you want to play the college game, you have to play by the college rules, but those are not the same thing as the public school rules. Okay, so how do we thread that needle? Well, we're going to make a plan. We're going to pay attention to meeting or exceeding those admissions requirements. But we're also going to embrace the freedom we have as homeschoolers to really bring in our students' interests, their strengths, their passions, and incorporate those into our high school curriculum. So you have to meet those minimum college entrance requirements, but you have a lot of flexibility in how you meet them. So let's take a look at that. What boxes do I absolutely have to check? That's the big question, right? Which ones do I have to check? Um, in your four-year plan for high school, or essentially just what you teach in grades 9 through 12, you really need to take into account a couple of things. First of all, are your legal requirements. So does your state have graduation requirements for homeschoolers? Those last two words are important. All states have graduation requirements for their public schools. Most of the time, those requirements aren't going to apply to you as a homeschooler. So you need to double check. Secondly, does your state have curricular requirements for homeschoolers? Some do. And you're still going to have to meet those requirements in whatever way that your state requires when you're in high school. If you use an umbrella school or a charter school, something like that, you want to check those requirements as well. So those are the legal hoops, right? When you've cleared all of those, then the second thing you want to look at are the common college admissions requirements. Admissions requirements do vary from college to college, but there are some common requirements that you're going to typically find at most schools. And they look a little something like this. 4 units of English, that's going to include literature and composition. 4 units in math. Algebra 1 and 2 and geometry are very often stated requirements that colleges specifically want to see. And then typically they will want to see at least 1 unit beyond Algebra 2. So this does mean that pre-algebra is a little bit of a gray area. Some colleges are kind of okay with it. Others would not be so okay with it as a high school credit. So if you're getting into ninth grade still in pre-algebra, you may want to look at, can we work in a fifth math? 2 to 3 units in the social sciences. So that's going to be your history, your world history and US history are very common requirements. But it's also going to include things like psychology, geography, civics and government, economics. Those would all fall under that social science umbrella. It doesn't have to be just history. 3 or more units of natural sciences. So biology and chemistry are going to be your baseline high school sciences typically. Most of the time, you're going to need to do those before you go on to anything cool like, marine biology or something like that. You want to aim throughout high school for a mix of life sciences and physical sciences and labs when you can. You need at least one typically lab, but the more labs you are able to work in, the better it typically is. Physics, people ask me about physics a lot. Physics as a class is not generally a requirement for general admission, but it may be needed for STEM majors, particularly in areas that are going to be heavily influenced by physics, like engineering. So you want to be sure to check not just the general requirements, but check for any of those specialized programs that your student is hoping to get into and make sure there aren't additional requirements for those. World languages, you want at least 2 units of the same language. So that's Spanish 1 and 2, not Spanish 1 and French 1. 3 to 4 units of world languages are better, particularly if you're aiming for highly selective colleges. And then you have your electives. Occasionally, you'll see some elective requirements out of school. Fine arts is pretty common. PE is pretty common. But otherwise, you're just using your elective slots to kind of round out your students' curriculum. So you can follow interests or career ambitions, or you can use that time to beef up the academics if you're aiming for more selective schools. So you always want to check the requirements at all colleges of interest, especially as your teenager gets older, approaching junior and senior year, and you're narrowing down the college list and the career goals. Check every single school because they can vary. And remember that posted requirements are minimums. Okay, so your high school curriculum needs to equip your students to become competitive in whatever tier of college he or she desires to attend. The more selective the college is for that student, again, we're thinking about comparing your student to the rest of the likely applicant pool at a given school. The more selective the college is for your student, the more that student's transcript should exceed the minimum requirements at that school. If you're in doubt, a 4x4 schedule is a really good place to start. That's going to be all 4 of your core courses, math, science, English, social studies, taken in all 4 years, plus at least 2 years of foreign language. And then you can build around that. That's a good core to start with. Rigor matters too. So the same biology or English class will carry more weight if it's an honors level class, even more weight if it's a college level class. So that would be your AP classes, your dual enrollment, that sort of thing. This is a really good place to boost your students' competitiveness by adding rigor to those baseline core courses that you're already doing. But do keep in mind that colleges are looking for increasing rigor over grades 9 through 12. So starting at the top isn't always the best idea. We'll talk about that more in just a few minutes. All right. Number 3, over here we have standardized tests are outdated and irrelevant. And on the other side, we have without test scores, no one's going to take your homeschool seriously. This can be a little bit touchy. As homeschoolers, we are up close and personal with our kids, with their development and their growth day in and day out. So sometimes, just sometimes, we get a teeny bit defensive at the idea that taking a test is the only way to prove they learned anything. Right? So we can be a little bit touchy about that kind of thing. And it's true that test scores are not always reflective of a student's ability. You certainly have students who have test anxiety. Sometimes you just have a bad day, right? It happens. That, though, doesn't change the fact that colleges can and do use test scores to determine how likely a student is to be successful in a college classroom. So, test scores can open doors. Colleges evaluate students on a variety of factors, and test scores are one piece of that puzzle. They help admissions get a clear understanding of your teen's abilities. So if you have high scores, and again, relative to the rest of the applicant pool, okay, that can help put your student over the top in admissions. It can help put them over the top in scholarships. That doesn't mean you've got to have a 1600 on the SAT, right? If the college's median score range is say 1120 to 1340 on the SAT. Your students 1370 bumps them right squarely into the top quartile. That's a really competitive place to be. So again, it's relative. Scores are sometimes preferred or even required for homeschoolers, even if they aren't for other applicants. That's just a reality. So again, you got to do your research. You have to know your college's policies. That is a school by school decision. So you really do have to look up the requirements at every school where your student's going to apply. But the testing landscape has changed tremendously since COVID, and many schools no longer require test scores of any applicant, homeschooled or otherwise. This is what's known as a test optional policy. If you don't feel that test scores are reflective of your academic ability, then you can opt to apply without them. That sounds really good, and people really like to jump on that. But again, this is a choice you want to make strategically, because applying test optional means that you are intentionally leaving out a piece of the puzzle. And without those test scores to compare your student to other students, the college will have to rely more heavily on the other aspects of the application. So your student's GPA, their extracurriculars, all of that kind of thing will need to be extra strong. That's not a homeschool thing, okay? It has nothing to do with the fact that your transcript is parent submitted or anything like that. It applies to anyone who chooses to apply test optional and not submit scores. Okay, so what's the strategy here? What's the middle ground? Well, in my opinion, my advice is that college-bound students should prepare for and should take a standardized college entrance exam. So the SAT, the ACT, sometimes the CLT. They should take it at least once, usually in their junior year. Why do I suggest that? Well, for one, because you won't know what your student's potential is until they actually take the test. And they may surprise you. Oftentimes they do. Once you have a score in hand, then you can decide what to do with it. You can decide whether it's worth it to continue trying to improve that score, or to apply with the score that you have, or to apply test optional, that is without any scores at all. If your student is on the threshold of a scholarship cutoff or near the score that would make a reach school more of a target school, or make a target school more of a safety school, then taking another attempt and trying to bump that score just a little bit might be your best strategy. Another reason is that you'll want to be prepared if your student decides late in the game to apply to a college that either requires scores or where providing scores would be your best strategy. Now, I know that teenagers never, ever change their minds, but just in case, having a score there can give you more flexibility. It takes time to schedule and sit for these exams and then wait for the scores to come back. Sometimes it takes up to a couple of months. And college application deadlines are hard stops. They're full, they're firm. There's usually a grace period of maybe a week or two that you can get some supplemental materials in, but it is not much time. You don't have time after you apply generally to decide, I'm going to try to submit scores. And lastly, you can always apply test optional, even if you have scores that you could report. You are not obligated to report them. So if you want to keep applying test optional on the table, then you want to make sure your student opts out of having any scores sent to colleges on test day. That's just a box that they check when they take the test. That way, when you're ready to report scores, you can then select which colleges are going to get them. And then you'll notify the testing agency to send the official scores. Sometimes you don't even have to send official scores at application time. You can just self-report. That way you can apply test optional at some schools and send scores to others if that's what you decide to do. So you retain control over who sees what. What about test prep? People like to ask me a lot about test prep. Most students will perform a little better with some preparation. That's especially true if they're not used to long tests and classroom settings. And guess what? Homeschoolers usually are not used to long tests and classroom settings. If you're using this kind of one and done strategy where you apply once and see what happens, I do recommend doing some prep beforehand and not taking the test cold. If you want to get kind of a feel for where your student might score, you can use the official practice tests. You want to make sure you do those under test conditions. So timed, not getting up to go to the bathroom in the middle, that sort of thing. These tests can be really tiring. And so some students may need to practice, sitting for a long time, staying focused for a long time. Another thing is that the SAT and the ACT are most often taken at local high schools in a classroom with other students, not usually during the school day. The public dates are typically on a Saturday. But if that setting is uncomfortable for you or for your student, you can consider the CLT, the Classic Learning Test, which can be taken remotely from home. Just know that the CLT is new and it's not accepted by all colleges, so you want to make sure that it meets your needs before you decide to go that route. All righty, moving right along. Myth number 4. On the one hand, we have people who say homeschooling high school is way too hard and I am afraid I'll mess it up, right? Stop me if you've heard that one. And on the other side, then we have the people who just say, all you need to be college ready is a cheap online program and it takes a couple hours a day, right? So we probably all know somebody who sent their kids to public or private school in ninth grade because they were just plain too intimidated by high school to keep homeschooling. And we've probably also all seen the ads for the inexpensive online video-based programs that supposedly are going to get your student prepared for college with a bare minimum time and money. So I kind of call those Fruit Loops programs. I'm gonna date myself here, but if you remember the old Saturday morning cartoon hour, the commercials for the sugary cereals were always on there, and they were supposed to be part of a balanced breakfast, right? I don't know about you, but I don't know of any kid who ever ate, their bowl of Fruit Loops plus 2 eggs, toast, and a glass of orange juice, right? You ate 2 bowls and you called it breakfast. And these programs are a little bit the same way. Technically, if you read the fine print, they define themselves as part of a complete curriculum. But they like to market to parents as if they're this one-stop shop that provides everything that your student needs to be ready for college. So I like to put it this way. Years ago, lifetimes ago, I worked in the marketing industry and we had a saying. It went like this: you can have it good, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap. Pick 2, right? Because you can't get all 3. And the same is true for your child's education. Homeschooling doesn't have to be costly. It doesn't have to be labor intensive on the parent's part. But if your student is aiming for college, and I would venture to say, even if they're not, their education does have to be good, which means you're going to have to put in either some time or some money, and possibly both, in order to ensure that you have a positive educational outcome. So, all that to say, just be wary of providers that try to sell you on solutions that are cheap and easy. And unfortunately, since COVID, there are a whole lot of them out there. But just like your student, you're going to get out of homeschooling what you're willing to put in. But that doesn't mean that homeschooling high school has to be insurmountable or so scary that you can't take it on. You really shouldn't be afraid of it. So let's look at the middle ground here. A college-bound student needs a college prep education. That should go without saying, right? That means that both the parent and the student are going to have to invest an adequate amount of time and or money into the educational process. But there are tons and tons and tons of resources out there to help you. So let's talk about some of those resources. As parents and educators, it really is important that we're honest about our limits. We can't be all things to all people, but we also need to trust ourselves to find and use the tools that we need when we need them. So the internet is making that easier than ever. There are resources all over the place, blogs and podcasts and discussion groups that put advice just right at your fingertips. All you have to do is ask and somebody will have an idea for you. So if you're schooling on a shoestring, you may need to put more time and energy in to sourcing free curriculum and inexpensive resources and things like that. Again, internet makes that really easy, but don't overlook old-fashioned things like your friendly neighborhood librarian. Tons of stuff out there. Outsourcing can be a lifesaver. If you're great with literature, but you struggle to teach math, then outsource math, right? That might mean getting signed up with someplace like Excelsior, or another online provider, which might cost you a little more, but make your life a million times easier. It could also look like a local co-op. It could look like bringing in a tutor. It could even look like trading services with another parent who is strong in that area, so that you use your subject matter expertise, and so do they, and everybody benefits. So it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money if you're willing to put in the time, and vice versa is true also. Homeschooling high school also doesn't have to be intimidating. In many ways, I tell my parents this all the time. You're just doing the same thing you did when your child was small. You're meeting her where she is, and you're moving forward from there, and you're both kind of learning as you go, right? You don't have to have it all figured out before you start the first day of ninth grade. But we all know too that 11th grade isn't first grade. It's not the same thing. You do need to ensure that your child is being challenged appropriately for their level and that the level of academic rigor in your school is steadily increasing throughout high school. So we often hear people talk about how homeschoolers finish their day so much faster than public school. That may or may not be the case in your high school, and that's okay. That's because when it comes to a college prep education, we want to think beyond just the content. We want to think about building those hard skills and those soft skills that your student's going to need to succeed in college and in life. So just because your team can plow through a course, even say a self-paced online college course, just because they can get through that in record time doesn't necessarily mean that they're reaping the benefit of that course. Learning at the high school level is about more than just accumulating factual knowledge and then regurgitating that knowledge back out on, say, a multiple choice quiz. It's about learning to apply that knowledge in real and meaningful ways. So high school students need to engage with the ideas of others, especially the great thinkers of the recent past and the distant past across disciplines. But then they also need to think critically about those ideas, and then they need to learn to articulate and advocate for their own thoughts and ideas so that other people can engage with them. And all of that takes time. So don't be discouraged if your student is spending more time on schoolwork compared to your neighbors up the street or compared to your own school in earlier grades, right? As long as a student isn't struggling and isn't overwhelmed, then needing to take time to wrestle with big ideas and concepts is not a bad thing. It means that you're appropriately challenging the student in front of you. This applies even to very bright students, sometimes more so, because bright students who naturally work faster need to experience having to work hard and even potential failure because they will experience those things in life. That doesn't mean they need to fail a class, but it's important that they have that mental toughness that they need to wrestle with difficult concepts and to struggle with thorny problems. That builds perseverance, it builds grit. It also builds study skills. Often students who breeze through academically in high school don't learn how to learn. And that's another skill they're going to need to succeed in college and even beyond. Workplaces increasingly value employees who can self-teach, self-start, take initiative. Those are the kinds of soft skills that serious academic study really develops. So the goal here is to provide the right amount of challenge for your individual student. That's going to look different from one student to the next. But just as you wouldn't want to push a student with, say, a disability into doing something that they're not able to do, you don't want to let an advanced student coast below their potential. Okay. Not every course has to be a challenge. We want time for fun. We want time to learn and enjoy learning for its own sake. And electives are a really great place to explore interests and things like that in a more relaxed way. Just remember that ultimately what your goal is to grow a human being who can think for himself or herself, who can discern truth, who can appreciate beauty, and who can then share all of those things with others for everyone's benefit. So just embrace this opportunity to watch your child blossom both as a young adult and a scholar, who can think deeply about the world around them and give them the opportunity to do that. Don't be afraid to give them the opportunity to do that. All right, one more myth of the evening, and we will wrap up. On the one side, we have people who believe that the fastest or earliest path to a degree must always be better. Why would you wait when you can get ahead? And on the other side, we have the people who say, well, I went to high school for 4 years and then I went to college for 4 years. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? So this is a myth that didn't exist when some of us of a certain age were in high school and college way back in as the kids say, the 1900s. Or at least it didn't exist to the degree that it does now, because options like dual enrollment and credit by exam have exploded in the last couple of decades. And they can be a really great opportunity for helping families save money because they're almost always cheaper than traditional college enrollment, and sometimes they're even free. And not everyone knows that these things exist. So sometimes families miss out. They end up spending more than necessary for a degree or going into debt or even foregoing college altogether because they think it's unaffordable. But probably worse is that some families get really caught up in the hype and they end up wasting time and money because graduating high school with a college degree sounds great, but it doesn't always work out the way families hope that it will. So, what's the middle ground? Well, earning college credit in high school can be a great strategy for saving time and money, definitely. But you do need to understand the limitations and you need to make sure that it supports your students' ultimate goals. So there are definitely some good reasons for bringing college credit into your home high school, if possible. Something like 44% of undergraduates will complete their degree within 4 years, which leaves a really big chunk of young people who are taking 5 or 6 or even more years to graduate from college. So going into college with some credit already under your belt can definitely reduce the time that it takes a student to graduate, which can definitely save you some money. Second, remember what we said earlier about demonstrating rigor in your student's academic program. Having college credit on your high school transcript can help to show colleges that your student is capable of handling advanced academic content and can make them more competitive for admissions. So definitely some pros there, but there are some caveats to early college credit as well. It's more complicated than most people realize that it is, and it's important to understand what the limitations are. So, caveat number one, first of all, earlier is not automatically better. Many families make the assumption that if earning college credit in 11th or 12th grades is good, then earning it in ninth grade or 8th grade or even 6th grade must be automatically better, right? It's not true. As I said, college credit can be great for demonstrating rigor in your student's academic record. But remember, we talked about that rigor needing to build over grades 9 through 12. So starting too early can mean that your student peaks too early. What you don't want to end up with is nowhere to go in senior year. That's the worst possible look on your college applications. So you don't want to get out over your skis. Starting too early can also mean that you max out on credit that's actually useful before your student gets out of high school. So you reach a point when you're talking about college credit at which it becomes difficult to choose college classes that are actually going to be useful inside a college degree if you don't know the student's target school and target major. It's hard to plan for a degree if you don't know what the degree is. That max point usually happens somewhere around 30-ish credit hours. That's only about 10 college classes. Uh, Most teens are not going to be ready to settle on a college and on a major before junior or senior year at least. Many not even then. So if your student reaches that max point in ninth grade or 10th grade before they're ready to decide on their path, then you really only have a couple of choices. You either have to cut back on the college credit, the college courses that you're doing, which isn't a good look from the perspective of rigor, or you may end up just picking stuff, taking stuff here and there, and wasting time and money instead of saving it. Even if you have the most careful planning, even if you know the target school and the major, credit acceptance policies aren't fixed. They can and do change fairly often. So you're still just kind of making an educated guess. It's hard in most cases to plan with absolute certainty. So the closer your student is to matriculation, to leaving high school and going into college full time, the better intel you'll have to work with, the more likely your plan's going to be successful. Second caveat is that college grades count. Any grade that your student earns in a college course is going to be recorded, and it has to be reported when he or she applies to their final destination college. So you want to be wary of letting your student get in over their head. College level coursework, it can be an adjustment for a lot of teenagers, especially in terms of skills like organization, time management, that kind of thing. You want to be prepared to help scaffold your student through their first few courses. Another area where college is different from high school for teens is in self-advocacy. Okay, college students are expected to speak for themselves, right? They're not expected to have mom call up the professor. They're expected to seek out help when they need it instead of waiting for help to be offered to them. And that kind of thing. That can be a real challenge for teenagers, especially young ones. So some students have the academic maturity for college. They don't necessarily have the social and emotional maturity. So you want to weigh all of those factors before you jump in. Caveat number three has to do with content. It really should come as no surprise to anyone that college classes are intended for adults. But parents are sometimes surprised by the types of content that college classes and college materials contain. So if you're not ready for your teen to encounter more mature topics and also to be discussing those topics with adults, even in a class where you might not expect that kind of thing to come up, you might want to hold off on enrollment a little bit. But another issue that people often don't consider is that many degree programs, especially the online degree programs, weren't even created for 18-year-old adults. They were created for a much older audience. Usually these programs are for adult learners who have already been through high school, who maybe have some college, they're advancing in their careers, and they just need to get a degree to help boost their prospects. So courses that are designed for people in their upper 20s, their 30s, their 40s, they're often going to leave out foundational material that's important for younger students. These older learners have already been through high school. They've already mastered that content or that skill, so it's not going to be built into the course. So your student may be getting through a class, but then missing out on deeper and more enriching educational experiences. There are often much better ways to appropriately challenge a gifted student than starting college credit in middle school. Okay. Lastly, you should exercise caution when it comes to the so-called degree hacking schemes that are out there. These programs usually attempt to launder or resell alternative credit in order to get a cheap and quick degree. Often they're selling a bachelor's degree concurrent with high school graduation. And this really is one of those, if it sounds too good to be true, kind of scenarios. The degree options in these programs are usually pretty limited, meaning you have to pick from a handful of generic majors. And often parents will say, well, I'm just going to have my child get a degree, so then they just have that and we've checked that box. But earning a bachelor's degree in just a random field in order to check a box is almost never a good idea. It can set your student up for all kinds of problems down the road if they decide they want to go back and earn a second degree in a field they actually want to pursue, including things like permanent loss of access to some forms of federal financial aid. So it is a big deal. It's something you want to be very careful with. Most of these programs also rely very heavily on alternative credit, such as ACE credit, which is credit that's not actually issued by a college. And as a result, that type of credit usually only transfers to a handful of colleges. So you want to be careful using these types of programs. You want to make sure that you understand what you're doing. And you want to be sure that your student will go on to matriculate at a college that will accept those credits. If they change their mind, and again, I know teenagers never change their minds, but if they do, just in case, they may lose their hard work. You may lose whatever money you've put into that program. So just a word of caution. So that leaves us with a question, right? How do we use college credit well in a homeschool? Well, my number one rule is always make sure that any college credit you bring into your homeschool makes sense in your student's high school plan first and foremost. Okay, that means we want to choose college credit options that can replace or supplement classes that are already needed in your high school plan. That way, you're getting something of value out of the class, even if it ends up not being college credit. So you want to match your college courses to your high school transcript and not the other way around. You also need to understand that in most cases, there are no guarantees that any credit your student earns now will transfer to their final destination school. It's especially true if we don't know what the final destination school is. So you want to focus on the types of credit that give you the highest chance of transferring. Those would be things like credit awarded by a regionally accredited college or university, and also credits that are in courses that are commonly required at most colleges and universities. So things like English 101, your basic sciences, some humanities classes. All of those will have a better chance of transferring at more places than specialized coursework. Credit that can check both boxes, it's regionally accredited and in one of those sort of basic gen ed requirements, will usually be your best bet for college credit while you're still in high school. And lastly, count any college credit your student earns as a win. Even a little bit puts you ahead of the curve. So don't be disappointed if your plan doesn't come out perfectly and you end up losing some credit in the end. Just remain flexible. Focus on what your student has gained, both the credit, but also in just the experience of having done something challenging and proved that they can do hard things. Okay. So there we have it. Five of the most pernicious myths that I think tend to plague homeschoolers, and they keep us up at night worrying about whether we're going to ruin our kids forever. Spoiler alert, you're not. So I know that was really quick, a lot of information in a short amount of time. So if you have questions or you want to talk through any of this, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly, or if I can help you with planning for high school or college, I'd be happy to do that. You can reach me through my website at yourguidancecounselor.com. There's no www. It's a little bit weird, just yourguidancecounselor.com. I also publish pretty frequently on my Substack, which is also called Your Guidance Counselor. So I write about college and career, and I have a pretty cool download there called 5 Steps to a 4-Year Plan. That's really great for helping you kind of think through high school with college in mind. So that's
Good.
what we do.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. You can look for the recording and the follow-up information coming out in the next 24 hours. And again, thank you for being here tonight, and we will close out our session. So have a good evening, and we will see you again, hopefully, in another webinar.